It was an early Tuesday morning when I first noticed something was wrong. I had just brewed my coffee and stepped out onto the porch to take in the fresh air. But what greeted me wasn't the peaceful sight of my land stretching out under the golden morning sun. Instead, I saw strange vehicles parked near my property line. Construction vehicles, surveyors' trucks, and workers milling about, all seemingly with no good reason. As I walked closer, I felt a knot form in my stomach. There were stakes planted all over my property, marking off sections with bright colored ribbons fluttering in the wind. I wasn't sure what I was seeing, but one thing was clear. Someone had started to lay claim to what was rightfully mine. I walked up to one of the workers, a man in his mid-30s, wearing a bright orange vest. He looked up at me, clearly startled by my presence. "Excuse me, can you tell me what's going on here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I was growing more agitated by the second. "Oh, we're just marking off some boundaries," he said, his voice a little too casual for my liking. "This is HOA-approved work. We're just laying down the lines for the new developments coming in." I could feel my blood pressure rising. The HOA? Why hadn't I been notified about this? My land, my family's land, had been passed down for generations, and I had no intention of letting anyone, not even the HOA, take it from me. "New developments? What developments?" I asked, now feeling more than just confused. "This land isn't yours to build on." The worker hesitated for a moment, clearly trying to gauge whether I was serious or just some upset homeowner. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "Well, sir, I'm afraid I can't share much, but the HOA has approved the project. You'll need to speak with Karen about any concerns." I didn't need to hear any more. I knew exactly who Karen was, the president of the HOA, and a woman who had a history of overstepping her boundaries. I had heard rumors before about her pushing through developments without consulting homeowners, but I didn't think it would ever affect me directly. As I stood there watching the workers continue to stake out the land, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a clear invasion of my property, and I wasn't going to sit idly by and let them take what was mine. I quickly marched back to the house and grabbed my phone. I wasn't about to let this slide. I called up a few neighbors, most of whom shared my suspicion about the HOA, and asked them to meet me at the community center in an hour. We needed to figure out what was going on, and fast. By the time I arrived at the center, a small group of us had gathered. I could see the concern on their faces, the same uncertainty I was feeling. One of the neighbors, John, who had lived in the area for over 40 years, spoke up first. "Tom, this isn't the first time Karen's tried something like this. She's been trying to get control of the land for a while now. I've heard whispers, but nobody has done anything about it." John was right. Karen had always been a bit too ambitious for my liking. She was the kind of person who saw the HOA as a way to bend the rules, manipulate people, and push through whatever projects she had in mind, regardless of what the homeowners wanted. "I'm not letting her get away with this," I said, my voice firm. "We need to do something now. We can't let her just take over." As the meeting continued, we realized that this wasn't just about the land. Karen had managed to tie this project into some kind of city development plan, and from what we could gather, she had been working with local officials to push the project through without notifying the residents. There were talks of zoning changes and construction of new homes, but the details were murky at best. The more we dug into it, the more we realized how deep this went. This wasn't just a small land grab. This was a full-scale power play by Karen, and she was using her position to manipulate the system for her own gain. I left that meeting feeling a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't about to let the HOA take my property, not without a fight. The next steps would be crucial, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't backing down. My land wasn't just dirt and grass, it was my family's legacy. It had been passed down through generations, from my great-grandfather who had worked the soil, to my father who had taught me everything I knew about maintaining the property. I grew up on this land. It was where I learned how to fix fences, plant trees, and sit in the shade of an old oak tree, watching the seasons change. It was more than just a piece of property. It was home. But now everything was changing. Karen, the president of the HOA, had found a way to push her agenda. She had started making moves on my property, and I had no idea why. The peaceful life I had here was being threatened, and I wasn't about to let it happen without a fight. The morning after the workers had been staking out my land, I couldn't shake the feeling of anger and unease. I stood on my porch, staring out at the land I loved, and all I could think was, they're taking it from me. That thought alone fueled a fire in me. I wasn't going to let this happen, not without a fight. I quickly grabbed my phone and called Eli, a friend of mine who happened to be a civil engineer. He was one of the few people I trusted, and I knew he'd have a better understanding of what was going on with the land and what my rights were. Eli, I need your help, I said as soon as he answered. The HOA's up to something, and I need to know what it is. After a few minutes, Eli agreed to come by. He wasn't a lawyer, but he knew the ins and outs of construction and zoning laws, and if there was anyone who could help me make sense of this, it was him. When Eli arrived, he spread out a map of the area on the kitchen table. This is the zoning map for the neighborhood, he said, pointing to a specific section. The HOA has been planning a new development here for months. They've been working with the city to change the zoning laws so they can build on land that's currently designated for residential use. I stared at the map in disbelief. They were planning to change the zoning laws. They were planning to build something on my property. The realization hit me hard. It wasn't just an issue of someone parking on my land or trespassing. It was a full-on land grab. And they had the resources and the political connections to make this happen, and they were doing it without consulting anyone, least of all me. I looked at Eli and said, "But why didn't anyone tell me about this? I've lived here my entire life. This is my land." Eli leaned back in his chair, a concerned look on his face. "That's what I don't get either. But it's clear they have been working behind the scenes, trying to pull strings with the city to make this happen." I stood up, pacing around the room. "This can't be happening," I muttered to myself. I thought about all the hours I'd spent maintaining the land, fixing fences, planting trees, and making sure everything was perfect. I thought about my father, who had passed away years ago, but whose memory and hard work were tied to every inch of the property. How could they just come in and take it? "We have to do something," I said finally, turning to Eli. "But we can't just sit here and hope it all works out. I need to get proof. I need evidence that what they're doing is illegal." Eli nodded. "I'll help you gather what we can. We can start by talking to some of the other neighbors, see if they have noticed anything strange or been contacted about these plans." We decided to meet up with a few neighbors later that day. Some of them had lived in the neighborhood for decades, and I knew they'd be just as concerned as I was about what was happening. When we gathered at the community center, the mood was tense. People were whispering, exchanging worried looks, but no one seemed to have any answers. John, a neighbor who had lived here longer than I had, was the first to speak up. "I've heard whispers about this," he said, his voice low. "Karen's been trying to get her hands on this land for a while. She's been making backdoor deals with the city. You're not the only one she's been going after." I turned to him, my frustration growing. "But why hasn't anyone said anything? Why are we just letting her do this?" John shook his head. "Most people don't want to get involved. They don't want to upset Karen or the HOA. But I've seen it myself. She's been pushing this agenda for months. They're doing this without telling anyone what's really going on." "Then we need to stop it," I said, my voice rising with determination. "We can't just sit back and let her take what's ours." We spent the next couple of hours discussing what we could do. Some neighbors were reluctant to get involved, fearing retaliation from Karen or the HOA. Others were on board, but we all knew that we couldn't just rely on petitions or complaints. This was going to take more than that. We needed hard evidence, and we needed it fast. Eli suggested that we start by gathering more documentation. He knew a few people who could help us get access to public records about the land and the zoning changes Karen had been pushing. He also suggested we try to reach out to a few lawyers who had experience with HOA disputes. But I knew that wasn't going to be enough. If we wanted to get everyone's attention, we needed to make a bigger impact. I began brainstorming. What could we do that would really make a statement? That's when the idea hit me. I wasn't just going to sit back and fight this through paperwork. I was going to show the HOA just how far I was willing to go. I decided to call in a bomb squad to check the land. Yes, you read that right, a bomb squad. Not because I thought there were explosives on the land, but because I needed to make a statement. I needed Karen and the HOA to understand that I wasn't backing down, no matter how powerful they thought they were. I began to make arrangements, contacting a local bomb squad team. I wasn't sure how they would react to this idea, but I was willing to do whatever it took to make my point. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it. The next steps would be crucial, and I was ready to take them. The day of the bomb squad's arrival was one I'll never forget. It was the kind of day where you could feel the tension in the air, thick like the humidity before a thunderstorm. I had no idea what would happen when the squad showed up, but I knew it was the kind of statement I needed to make. I wasn't going to sit back and let Karen and the HOA take what was rightfully mine. They needed to understand that I wasn't afraid of them. I had arranged for the bomb squad to show up at the crack of dawn. I'd sent out messages to a few neighbors I trusted, letting them know that something big was about to go down. As the truck carrying the bomb squad rumbled down the dirt road towards my property, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and dread. It felt like the moment of truth. There was no turning back now. Karen had no idea what was coming. As I walked up to the land, I saw her standing near the surveyor's truck, clipboard in hand, barking orders at her workers. She had no clue that I had a plan to bring this all to light. She thought she had everything under control, but that was about to change. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest, and called out to her. "Karen!" I shouted, my voice carrying across the field. She turned, surprised to see me approaching, but her expression quickly hardened when she saw the bomb squad truck in tow. "Tom, what is this nonsense?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. "Just making sure everything's safe, Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the rush of adrenaline. "I've got a few questions for you. What exactly are you doing on my property?" I could see her jaw tighten, the annoyance in her expression giving way to something deeper, something more calculating. She took a step forward, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "This is none of your business," Karen said coldly. "You're just making a scene for no reason. The HOA has every right to do this. You're wasting everyone's time." I couldn't help but smile to myself. She had no idea what was coming. I motioned for the bomb squad to start unloading their equipment, and that's when the real drama began. The workers who had been standing idly by suddenly began to whisper among themselves. They didn't know what was going on either, but it was clear they were starting to feel uneasy. The bomb squad officers, suited up in their heavy gear, began to cordon off the area, setting up their equipment to inspect the ground. Karen's face went pale as she realized the magnitude of the situation. She glanced at me, then back at the workers, who were now looking at her with confusion and suspicion. She took a step back, clearly trying to figure out her next move. "You're out of line, Tom," she said, her voice shaking with barely concealed anger. "This is ridiculous. You can't just bring in a bomb squad for something like this. There's nothing here." I raised an eyebrow, my expression calm but firm. "I beg to differ," I said coolly. "The only thing ridiculous here is you thinking you can just come onto my land without my permission and start marking it up like you own it. I think it's time we figure out what you're really up to." Karen's eyes flicked nervously toward the bomb squad, who were now scanning the area with their equipment. One of the officers approached us, holding up a metal detector. He glanced over at me and then at Karen. "You're sure there's nothing buried here?" the officer asked her, his tone professional, but with an edge of skepticism. Karen's face flushed with a mix of panic and frustration. "Of course I'm sure," she snapped. "You're wasting your time. This is all just a misunderstanding." But I could tell she was starting to unravel. It was as if the bomb squad had somehow given her a glimpse of the true stakes. She was no longer in control of the situation. The workers began to back away, and the air was thick with tension as the bomb squad continued their sweep of the land. I could see Karen's mind racing, but I wasn't going to let her escape this time. I had the evidence, and I was going to make sure it was exposed. While the bomb squad worked, I pulled out the documents Eli had helped me get, the zoning changes, and the evidence of the shady deals Karen had been making with local officials. I hadn't fully understood the extent of what she had been doing, but now I was beginning to connect the dots. I knew that Karen had been forging documents, manipulating city officials to push her development project through, all while keeping the residents in the dark. But the bomb squad's search wasn't just about finding buried objects. It was about exposing the truth, about showing everyone who was behind this mess. As I looked through the documents, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I had everything I needed to bring her down, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. After what felt like hours, the bomb squad finished their sweep. They found nothing, no explosives, no hidden treasures, just the dirt and rocks that had always been there. But that wasn't the point. The point was the message I was sending. Karen was caught in a lie, exposed for her shady dealings, and she knew it. I walked up to her, holding up the papers. "I think it's time for you to explain yourself, Karen," I said, my voice low and steady. Her face went white as she looked at the documents. She knew she was busted. She tried to mask her panic, but it was no use. The truth was out. I don't know what you're talking about," Karen stammered, her usual bravado completely gone. "Really?" I said, flipping through the papers. "Because according to these records, you've been altering city zoning laws and pushing through development projects without informing the residents. This land is mine, Karen, and I'm not letting you take it." The workers who had been standing around awkwardly began to murmur among themselves. It was clear that they were starting to realize just how deep Karen's deceit went. She was losing control, and she knew it. "You're going to regret this," Karen hissed through gritted teeth, but it was clear she no longer had the power to back up her threats. I stepped closer to her, making sure the workers could hear me. "No, Karen, you're the one who's going to regret this. You've been taking advantage of people for too long. It's time for this to end." As Karen stood there defeated, I knew that this was only the beginning. The community was finally seeing her for what she really was. A power-hungry manipulator who was willing to do anything to get what she wanted. And with the truth now out in the open, the next step was clear. It was time to bring her to justice. The next day felt like a whirlwind. The bomb squad incident had shaken things up. But I wasn't naive enough to think that Karen and the HOA were just going to roll over. They still had influence, still had the power to drag things out and make this as difficult as possible. But I had one thing they didn't, the truth. As I stood in front of my house, the morning sunlight streaming over the land I had fought so hard to protect, I felt an odd sense of peace. The evidence was irrefutable. The documents, the bomb squad, the witnesses. Everything pointed to Karen's manipulation. But even with all that, I knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. I called Eli that morning. "I think it's time," I said. "I'm ready to go public with everything." "Are you sure?" Eli asked, his voice calm but concerned. "Once you do this, there's no turning back. The HOA will come at you with everything they have got." "I'm not backing down," I said, my voice firm. "I've got to expose her for what she is, for what they all are." The plan was simple, but it would pack a punch. I wasn't just going to file another complaint or go to court with a lawyer. I was going to gather the whole neighborhood, all the people who had seen the truth for what it was, and hold a public meeting in front of the entire community. I would present the evidence, all of it, to everyone. There would be no more hiding behind closed doors, no more backroom deals. This was going to be a showdown, and Karen was going to face the consequences of her actions. The community center was filled with the usual crowd that morning, some curious neighbors, some skeptical, and some who had been on Karen's side up until now. As I walked into the room, I could feel the weight of the situation settling over me. I had been preparing for this day for months, but the reality of it was still a little overwhelming. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about the integrity of the whole community. The corruption that had taken root in the HOA had spread, and it was time to pull it out by the roots. I stepped up to the front of the room where a large projector screen was set up. I could see Karen and a few of her supporters sitting in the back, their faces tight with anger and suspicion. They had no idea what was coming. I turned on the projector, and the first slide came up. An aerial map of the neighborhood with red marks outlining areas that the HOA had been eyeing for development. "This is the first piece of the puzzle," I began, my voice steady. "These red marks represent the land that Karen and the HOA have been targeting. They've been working with the city to change zoning laws without consulting any of you, the residents." I heard murmurs from the crowd, but Karen wasn't fazed. She sat back in her chair, arms crossed, eyes narrowing as she tried to maintain her composure. I clicked to the next slide. It was a screenshot of an email exchange between Karen and a city official. I could feel the room tense up as I read the message aloud. Here, Karen is in direct communication with city planner Martin Phelps, requesting zoning changes to make this land available for commercial development. She didn't ask the community's opinion, and she didn't follow the proper procedures for these changes. I paused for effect. This, folks, is called illegal zoning manipulation. Gas rippled through the room. Karen's face turned white, her jaw clenching. She was doing everything she could to stay calm, but it was clear the walls were closing in. She shot up from her seat, ready to object, but I wasn't going to give her the chance. This email, I continued, flipping to the next slide, was only part of the story. It gets worse. I played the video footage I had captured the day the bomb squad came to the property. The entire scene was caught on camera. Karen's reaction, the bomb squad's search, and the chaos that ensued. The workers' uncomfortable glances, the hesitation in Karen's voice when the bomb squad began their inspection. All of it was there, in full view for everyone to see. I didn't leave a single detail out. The room was silent now. The footage was undeniable. People were whispering amongst themselves, their disbelief palpable. "You see, Karen," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet, "you didn't just break the rules. You tried to manipulate the entire neighborhood for your own personal gain. And when things started to go south, you lied, you covered up, and you tried to intimidate people into staying silent." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but she was cut off by a loud voice from the back of the room. "This is outrageous." It was John, the neighbor who had warned me about Karen's schemes from the start. "Karen, you've been pulling the strings behind our backs for far too long. You've been using the HOA to get whatever you wanted. We trusted you, and this is how you repay us?" The crowd was suddenly full of voices, some outraged, some confused, but all united in their disbelief at what they were hearing. The tide had turned. People who had once been on Karen's side were now beginning to see her for who she really was. A power-hungry leader who had been manipulating the system for her own benefit. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Karen's face twisted in rage. "This is slander," she yelled. "You can't prove any of this. This is all lies." But her outburst didn't have the same effect it once would have. The room had already turned against her. The evidence was there, plain as day. The email, the video, the documents. There was no escaping it. The community could see the truth for what it was, and they weren't going to let her off the hook. I turned to the crowd, my voice steady and unwavering. "Karen has been playing all of us for fools. She's been using her position to get away with things that should never have happened. But it's time for that to end. We're not going to let her do this to us anymore." The crowd erupted in applause. It was loud. It was overwhelming. It was the sound of justice being served. Karen stood there, fuming, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She didn't know what to do. Her carefully crafted world was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She shot a look of pure venom at me before storming out of the room, followed by a couple of her supporters who were too stunned to speak. As the door slammed shut behind her, I could hear people in the room already discussing what to do next. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about making sure the HOA couldn't keep abusing its power. It was about taking back control of our community. The weeks that followed the public reveal were a blur. The shockwave from that meeting reverberated throughout the community. People were talking, neighbors who had been silent, those who had been too intimidated by Karen's influence, suddenly found their voices. The truth was undeniable, and the momentum was building. Karen's power within the HOA quickly crumbled. After the public expose, her supporters, once loyal to her every word, began to distance themselves. They had seen the evidence, heard the truth, and they were no longer willing to back her up. It wasn't just her reputation that was destroyed, it was her whole agenda. No one was going to let her push through her development plans anymore. But even after Karen's departure, the work wasn't over. The damage she had done to the HOA's integrity was real, and there was a lot to rebuild. We couldn't just kick her out and expect everything to return to normal. There was a greater task at hand, restoring trust and unity within the community. I reached out to the neighbors who had been most vocal in supporting me, and we decided to form a new leadership within the HOA. It wasn't about revenge. It was about creating a space where the voice of every homeowner could be heard, where we could make decisions that were in the best interest of the entire community, not just one person with too much power. Together, we held another meeting, but this one was different. This time, it was about rebuilding, about moving forward. The mood in the room was vastly different. There was a sense of hope, a feeling of unity that had been missing for so long. We had taken back control of our community, and now we were going to make sure it stayed that way. As we discussed new bylaws, rules that would protect the residents and ensure transparency, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for everyone in the neighborhood who had ever felt powerless against the HOA. We had proven that even in the face of corruption and manipulation, the truth would always find its way to the surface. The new leadership we formed wasn't perfect, but it was fair. We made sure that every voice, no matter how small, would be heard. We established a set of checks and balances so that no one person could ever gain the kind of unchecked power Karen had once held. And as we continued to move forward, I couldn't help but notice how the community began to change for the better. The feeling of camaraderie that had been absent for so long slowly started to return. People started working together again, helping each other out with yard work, hosting barbecues, and sharing stories of their own experiences with the HOA. The trust that had been broken was slowly being rebuilt, piece by piece. And for me, personally, it felt like a weight had been lifted. The constant stress and worry had faded. I could finally go back to enjoying the land my family had owned for generations. My kids could play freely in the backyard without fear that someone would come along and try to take it from them. The peace I had once known, that feeling of security, had returned. But the most important lesson I had learned throughout this entire ordeal wasn't just about standing up to the HOA or exposing Karen's lies. It was about the power of a united community. Alone, we were vulnerable, but together we were unstoppable. As I stood outside on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the land that I had fought so hard to protect, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. We had won. And we had done it the right way. We had worked together, fought for what was right, and in the end, justice had prevailed. If you've been following this story and you've felt inspired by what happened, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt powerless against a larger authority or organization? How did you handle it? What lessons have you learned from standing up for what's right? Leave a comment down below and share your own experiences with HOA battles or any other situation where you had to take a stand. If you've ever fought for justice, your story might just inspire someone else who's going through something similar. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more stories like this, stories of standing up for your rights, overcoming obstacles, and achieving justice, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means the world to me, and I'm so grateful to have such an engaged and thoughtful community here. Thank you for being part of this journey. Stay tuned for more stories, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep standing up for what you believe in, and remember, justice always finds a way.